You are watching Bloomberg Tech Europe. Coming up, Sweden is known for its long, cold winters, but it's also become a hotbed for some of tech's most successful startups. From Spotify to Klarna, Sweden has produced no fewer than 46 unicorns. Startups, of course, valued at more than $1 billion. So, what is the secret sauce behind the success of this Nordic nation of just 10 million people?
One of the things that we have here as well is good capital markets. That's never been a constraint. And I think that's one of the factors. But more so, I think the culture and the talent is what's driving us punching above our weight.
So we're going to hear from a slate of top guests, including the CEOs of Lovable and Legora, on why Sweden is increasingly being called Silicon Valhalla. Welcome to Bloomberg Tech Europe. So from Skype to Spotify, Sweden is now legitimately a tech startup powerhouse. With just 10 million people, Sweden has produced no fewer than 46 unicorns. Startups, of course, worth more than $1 billion. And with venture capital investment per head of population higher than anywhere else in Europe, there's a strong pipeline of startups, more than 2,200, according to a recent report. And when it comes to the founder factory effect, former employees going on to start their own new companies, 2 Swedish names are top of the table. According to data from Cassel and Dealroom, Klarna staff have founded no fewer than 74 tech businesses, and former employees from Spotify a total of 66. But the path to startup success is rarely a straight one, of course. Buy now, pay later company Klarna's $15 billion IPO in New York was seen as a major coup for Sweden, but in less than 6 months, the company's share price has fallen by more than 60% on concerns about profitability. And much-hyped startup Northvolt, once Europe's biggest hope for EV battery production, ended up filing for bankruptcy. A reminder then that unicorns can be a wild ride, even in Sweden, but the numbers suggest it is at least a promising place to hunt for them. Now, Swedish AI startup Lovable has hit $400 million in annual recurring revenue, ARR, as companies and users flock to the artificial intelligence tools that make it easy for anyone to code. The Stockholm-based company was founded in 2023. It's one of a growing number of so-called vibe coding startups that allow users to prototype apps and sites using plain English prompts. Meanwhile, the company is making a deliberate choice, keeping its headquarters in Stockholm, not Silicon Valley. Its CEO says Europe is being underestimated by US investors, and he argues the next $100 billion tech company could emerge from Sweden. I spoke to Lovable CEO, Chief Executive Anton Osika, about why the country may have the edge over other European tech hubs.
I think there's a few parts of this. One of the big ones is that as a Swedish startup, you're used to building globally from day one. The economy here is small, but the density of talent is very high. And whenever a startup starts here, they might say, if there's a business-to-business startup, they might focus on a few customers here, and then they go global from almost from day one. What we're also seeing is that there is very much of a long-term thinking and a culture around building for the coming decades.
Is that long-term thinking, is that a particular moment, or is it repeatable, do you think, and sustained in Sweden?
This has always been this case, I would say, compared to companies. I've had Swedes that come back to Sweden from working in Silicon Valley, in London at tech companies, and they miss the way that we think about being here for the long term, and everyone really caring about the team performing really well, being very, very well knit together, which is more of the Swedish culture of building teams and tech companies in general.
Are you seeing more of that? Swedes coming back to Sweden, and indeed US talent coming to Sweden? Is that something that you're seeing in a meaningful way?
100%. So since we are at a scale that is kind of the hypergrowth that is more uncommon in Sweden, we have a few leaders that are been kind of schooled at companies outside of Sweden, and they're moving with their families to Stockholm.
And to be clear, this is a Sweden, this is an ecosystem that you believe can genuinely build globally scalable, globally significant tech companies, not just highly efficient companies that then get bought by US capital?
Yeah, 100%. We are in this for the long term. One of the things that we have here as well is good capital markets. That's never been a constraint, and I think that's one of the factors. But more so, I think the culture and the talent is what's driving us punching above our weight.
So do you think the next $100 billion tech company comes out of Silicon Valley or out of Stockholm?
The next one, I think we have very good chances to do it from here, from Stockholm.
Okay, yeah. And you've made the deliberate decision of keeping your headquarters in Stockholm.
Yeah,
why?
Yeah. So it is the long-term thinking, the low turnover of teams who work from here. They become very tight-knit and successful together. It's the access to talent, or we can be the absolutely biggest talent magnet where everyone in Stockholm wants to work. So it's a very strategic decision, and I'm very, very proud to be able to build a generational company that changes how humans interact with technology, which is what Loveable does, from Stockholm.
What can the rest of Europe learn from what Sweden is doing right when it comes to supporting that tech ecosystem?
It's a lot of how previous founders help the new generation of founders, which we have. Of course, there's a lot of this in Silicon Valley, and there's also that here in Stockholm. I think the other part is just making sure that entrepreneurs feel supported and have role models to look up to, celebrating those role models and inspire them to go out and start companies. I think it's hard to learn like a cultural change, but that's fundamentally what is strong here. It's the culture of building from the global market from day one. I understand that that's a bit different from some of the larger European countries.
Is there anything that you would change if you could that would further turbocharge Sweden's success in tech?
I think I would love it to be easier to innovate together with the government in Sweden. It's not something we have looked at so much in terms of from a commercial interest, but I just know that we could have an even stronger social system if there was the same type of technological innovation that's happening in the private sector was even faster embraced in the public sector. And we're good at it, but I just know we can be even better at it.
So the government should be adopting some of these tech solutions and integrating tech more rapidly. Is that part of what you're getting at there?
I would like to see ambition and urgency from leaders, political leaders and institutional leaders to reimagine what is possible with technology and with AI in terms of serving and providing services to the population at large.
Do you think that's lacking, that urgency as well in Brussels?
I think this urgency could be higher in Sweden. I think it's lacking in Europe at large, for sure. I think some people in the European leadership, Ursula, she has the urgency, I feel it, but we need it across every part of Europe, and adopting European technology creates, I guess, an even stronger flywheel of more Europeans that see that you can have impact if you build technology for the public sector. So that's also something I would love to see. One of the parts of urgency is in the education sector and training the next generation on understanding that you don't need to study and learn the knowledge. You can go out and solve real problems since you have access to all the world's knowledge in your phone. And you can, at an early age, which I've been seeing through my career, very ambitious, talented people, they can change the world, especially when they have AI at their fingertips.
Do you think US investors in particular underestimate Europe?
I think so, 100%. I think since we started growing, there were a lot of investors like, oh wow, how did we not think about that you can build a company like this from Stockholm? And I'm just super proud that we are here and we are on the track to build a company that's going to shape the future of how us humans create, shape and use technology.
Lovable CEO Anton Osika speaking to me there in Stockholm. Meanwhile, SSE Business Labs, their rise mirrors Stockholm's. Despite its relatively small size, the startup incubator at the Stockholm School of Economics has supported more than 360 companies, including Klarna, Budbee and Legora, and now ranks among Europe's top startup launchpads. I spoke with the CEO, Isabel Keulen, about how Sweden built a thriving pipeline of founders and why the next challenge is keeping talent and capital from moving abroad.
I'm seeing it firsthand from the incubator, people building remarkable things. And, statistics shows that we are punching above our weight. Sweden produces more unicorns per capita than any other European country. And we make up only 3% of European GDP.
So what is Sweden's secret sauce then?
Yeah, I think there's so many different factors that goes into that secret sauce. But if I name the main things, I'd say we have, for one, a very tech-savvy population. And being a very small home market, people are forced to build with a global mindset from day one. And the one thing that I'm seeing now, which I think is the most important piece of that secret sauce, is the founder density that we have here right now. So, Business Lab has produced companies like Klarna, Voi, Budbee, Legora, and what we're seeing is that many of these founders are still kind of in a concentrated area around us. And many of those companies, they function a bit like startup universities, where they produce a whole new generation of founders who, many of them come back to build with us. And with some of the more recent breakthroughs like Loveable, we've had 2 people from the early Loveable team come back and build from here. So I think that matters a lot for the ecosystem as a whole, that you have this concentration of new builders and the people who have done it before, who are all helping each other out.
And that's why some people describe Stockholm and Sweden as Silicon Valhalla.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there are echoes of Silicon Valley here.
Exactly. And I think what is similar is that we do have, so ecosystems are built locally, right? And it's a physical thing that happens in a specific area. And that's what we're seeing in Sweden, is that many founders are concentrated in the same area. And there's a lot of talent, very tech-savvy population who are in the midst of this, who are being able to come in and do this.
What else could and should Sweden be doing to support this ecosystem? What's missing right now?
We need to have a concentration of talent here, which we do have right now. But how do we keep them here? We have a lot of international investors looking at our companies. Many of them also from day one decide to list in Delaware, because they feel like it signals ambition, and they know that their chances of securing more capital might be higher if they move across the pond. So we need to facilitate that type of ecosystem where we also solve the capital bit and the exit opportunities for these companies. I think that's going to be crucial going forward.
Where do you see this ecosystem in 10 years' time?
I'm very optimistic. I think that we can stay a leading tech ecosystem globally, and I'm very excited about the stuff I'm seeing being built right now. The challenge is what you touched on before. How do we keep them here? How do we have... So Loveable decided to keep their headquarters in Stockholm. Incredible. That's going to create so many new breakout companies.
SSE Business Labs CEO Isabel Keulen. Coming up, how else do you explain Sweden's tech success? There is more to this story. The CEO of $5.5 billion startup Legora says it could be explained by something in the water or the classroom. That interview is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Tech Europe. Investors say Sweden's tech success did not happen by chance. Early investment in digital infrastructure, free higher education and a small domestic market have pushed founders to build globally from day one. To understand the foundations of Sweden's startup ecosystem, I spoke to the investment director of private equity firm Kinnevik, Tatiana Shalalvand.
think it's not an accident that Sweden has become this tech powerhouse. I think there are a few structural advantages that we've had the past decades. Firstly, we have invested very early in digital infrastructure, which has built a digitally literate population. Secondly, we have free education, which I think produces very strong engineering talent in the long run. And many founders that have built these successful companies, like Spotify, for instance, have technical backgrounds. I think thirdly, Sweden is a very small domestic market, which actually is an advantage because we can't rely on local scale. We have to think about going global from day one.
Going global from day one. Kinnevik Investment Director Tatiana Shalalvand speaking to me. Another defining trait of Sweden's startups is a deep focus on user experience. Fredrik Cassel, partner at European venture capital firm Creandum, an early investor in companies including Spotify, Klarna, Lovable and Black Forest Labs, explains how design-led thinking has helped Swedish companies scale worldwide.
The Swedish company building culture has always been centered around the user and even around design. If you think about it, the first international exports from Sweden was maybe ABB or Ericsson, but then you had H&M and you had Volvo and you had IKEA. These are companies that realize that to build a great product, you need to put the user first and you need to build for the masses. You can't be excluding when you build the user interface. It needs to be for everyone. I think this DNA of simplifying, beautifying, and making it accessible to everyone, I think this is something that really is at the core of Swedish company building. This DNA of building with the user in the center and understanding what do they need is the thing that is going to build value in the application layer.
It's a Steve Jobs approach to product.
I think it's a Steve Jobs approach to product. I still think that there is really a chance to tie brand and design together. When you build beautifully designed products and make it part of your brand, just as Spotify did in the early days, just as Lovable has done, and maybe even a company like Klarna, who've associated themselves to a specific kind of transactions in a smooth way, I think that's also an opportunity that not necessarily all of the, let's call it, frontier labs embrace.
Creandum partner Fredrik Cassel. Meanwhile, Legora is one of Sweden's most talked about tech startups. Earlier this week, the legal AI firm announced it had raised $550 million in Series D funding, tripling its valuation to $5.5 billion. Legora's meteoric rise comes as the firm looks to expand in the US. But the company is also bullish on Sweden's tech prospects. The CEO, Max Junestrand, says a big part of the country's tech success has been its early adoption of computers in schools and what he describes as a lack of respect for authority.
Maybe it's something in the waters, but I think it's a couple of things that are really working in our favor. One, Sweden did a really good job with a computer rollout in the early 90s and 2000s. And so when I went to elementary school, you got your own laptop. I was really early into programming. And then I think we have this sense of lack of respect for authority. Like, how hard can it be? So when we started Legora in Sweden in 2023, we did not think of Sweden as our market. We thought about the world as our market. And we have a couple of significant role models like Spotify and Sky. And what's inspiring to us is, well, if they could do it, how hard could it be? And then the weather is, what it is. And so 6 months during the year, it's nicer to be inside working than to go out and do other stuff.
Do you think that Silicon Valley stranglehold is coming to an end then, Max?
I think that the current situation is that we have a lot of strong model builders there, but there are different layers of the AI stack that is being built. And I actually think that the advancements in technology that we're seeing is making it more accessible so that you can build a global winner starting in Stockholm, Sweden, and not San Francisco. And I really do think that talent is sort of evenly dispersed throughout the world. But the reality is that we are in the US because a lot of the talent that we need also only exists here, right? I think I saw on the news that we're like the second most valued private tech company in Sweden. And we are one of the only companies that are B2B. And so the B2B talent pool, sort of selling business to business, doesn't really exist in Sweden. And so we have to look elsewhere. We have to go to London, we have to go to the US, and we have to build globally from day one. And I think AI has done a lot for increasing the ambition of Swedish and European founders.
So there is that founder factory effect, isn't there? But what would you do if there's one lever you could pull to unlock that growth capital in Sweden, in Europe, what would it be, Max?
I don't think I would raise from a Swedish VC. I mean, we have always picked the right investor for what's next for our company. And we quickly scaled to the UK, and now we're scaling and expanding in the US because that's our biggest market opportunity. I don't think that there's a lack of capital. I think that there's a lack of very ambitious founders deserving of that capital, to be very honest, right? There's not a shortage of, like, if you need to get funding, you can get it. It's just that a lot of the ideas and the companies that people are building aren't maybe necessarily venture fundable, right? And so if you are like the top tier founder, then because you have access to capital in the US, then like why shouldn't you get that? Because for most people, the US is going to be their biggest market.
And that was Legora's CEO. While we were visiting Sweden, we took the chance, of course, to ask our guests about the recent AI software selloff. Is it justified or overblown? Take a listen.
Our mission is to let anyone be able to create software. And then what naturally happens if anyone can create software is that people who were more in a type of monopoly situation, they are not in that situation anymore. And naturally, their assets become less valuable.
I think a lot of jobs that exist today are not going to be around for much longer. But I also think that we will be doing different things, especially in junior roles. I spent the beginning of my career answering support calls, chatting to customers over the support chat. That's not going to be necessary anymore. And AI can do that much better than a human.
Number one, obviously, there's the uncertainty around growth, durability. Investors are kind of asking which SaaS models are truly defensible over time. And then secondly, there's a belief that AI could compress margins or at least kind of reduce differentiation.
There will be a polarization. There will be survivors and there will be people who thrive less well.
Well, on the next episode, we're going to take a deep dive into ARM, the UK chip company's blueprints used in 90% of the world's smartphones. It has ambitions for the AI data centre. Catch that episode April the 10th.